Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy Terrans, Walking Microcolonies, written by Arctis 2020. The conference room was filled with anticipation as the title of the presentation, Terrans, Walking Microcolonies, was flashed on the screen. Species from across the galaxy muttered to each other as the next speaker prepared for his session. Questions buzzed in 1,000 different tongues from 1,000 different appendages. What could this be about? Will the humans turn out to be some sort of micro-hive mind? Will the humans turn out to be a house of parasitic worm? And their fleshy appendages are mere flesh shoots of an inferior species. Are they a collection of beings sharing a seemingly singular individual bodies? What more could there be? At the front of the stage, a small, furry mammalian sapient, an Orc, came onto the stage. His long, rabbit-like ears seemingly surveying the chatter of the audience as it lightly twitched a few degrees left and right with each step. Seeing the slab-coat-dressed figure, the audience slowly fell into attentive silence. "Good day, fellow academics. I am Dr. Lbry," he began, "and thank you for choosing to attend this presentation." Dr. Lbry took a deep breath before continuing, with the audience seemingly subconsciously mirroring the motion. "Humans have long been discussed at length in the galactic stage, even before the species' formal introduction into the galactic community," he continued. "In fact, this very conference that we're all attending today is a testament to the galactic community's curiosity regarding this equally curious sapient species. Despite the general theme, perplexing populations and exploration of a unique galactic species, well over half of the discussions concern the conundrum that is humanity. We just have to be thankful that our human colleagues are such good sports that they don't mind being theoretically dissected like a veneer in a high school science lab." At this, a couple chuckles, or what counts as chuckles in other species, emanated from the crowd, half of which probably coming from the humans in the room. Humans, it seems, as an enigma. They are often portrayed as some sort of devil that laughs at the doctrine that we call causality and science, the professor said, earning a few nods and affirmations from the audience. Many have discussed their uncanny scientific and technological marvels that can both destroy worlds or heal them. Many have discussed, both formally and informally, their shocking capacity to withstand conditions and substances that could wipe out 60% of all known sapient species in a heartbeat. Many have discussed their shocking war-filled histories juxtaposed with their many acts of compassion. Many have discussed how their xenopsychology can be as pacifistic as an Orc or as warlike as a Hygic. And many more have discussed the puzzling reality that, despite being born from a Deathworld that is far beyond all known categorizations of Deathworld and deserved its own classification, humanity approached the galactic community with peace. These are all very interesting topics indeed, but we will not be talking about any of these, at least for now. Here, some of the audience began to stir. 100 different expressions of confusion visible to Dr. Lbry. Right about now, many of you are probably asking, what does a xenomicrobiologist have to say about the humans? Or more likely, how did this nutcase even get into this portion of the conference? Well, it's quite simple. I'm here to talk about the human digestive tract, or more specifically, the human gut, Dr. Lbry revealed. At this, some of the audience began to rise from their seats and move to the nearest exit, disappointed at the mundanity of the topic. Dr. Lbry seemed unfazed by this, however, and was quick to continue speaking. Now, before you all pack up and leave, I'll ask you all to let me give you a bit of context. It is common knowledge that, despite many physiological differences in species' digestive tracts, there are broad similarities. 1. Species utilize a compound that breaks up ingested substances into composite parts. 2. Species utilize contractions to aid the digestion and passage of these compounds. And 3. Species' modes of digestion is solely dependent on their own native genetic code. That is to say, Everything about this process is predictable from the genetic point of view across all sapient species. Dr. Lbry paused, as if expecting the audience to respond. At this, a couple hundred members of the audience proceeded to do their species equivalent of an eye roll. As each translation software registered these non-verbal cues, Dr. Lbry continued, "That is all except the Terrans." The audience members that rose and began to leave were stopped in their tracks and slowly made their way back to their seats, the disappointment turning once more into curiosity. Other, more observant members of the audience began to check the translation software. "And no, that is not a fluke of your translation software," Dr. Lbry clarified, much to the relief of some of the listeners. "I did mean to say Terrans, and for good reason. Remember that. For a very long time, we have surmised that the resiliency of human digestion is due to the capacity to produce a highly acidic substance within their stomachs, alongside their highly regenerative physiology." Dr. Lbry narrates and the screen flashes a 2D representation of a human stomach in action. "For the most part, that is true," he confirms. "If we were to expose the vast majority of sapient species to these gastric substances, we would be charged with 7 war crimes and 10 counts of bioterrorism." The look of terror flashed on the faces of most of the audience members, as a 2D stomach was squeezed onto a 2D auric and was instantly dissolved. Xenobiologists so far have assumed that the lower portions of the human digestive tract was, like most life forms in the galaxy, primarily used to further absorb remaining nutrients through contact with the organism's internal cells before defecation. The Orcs continues, his nose twitched in what looks like a subconscious look of disgust as he finishes his sentence, likely imagining the process a bit too accurately. The audience held their breath. What could possibly be shocking twist this time? What more could this mad species have? "Terrans," Dr. Lbry states with a bit of emphasis, "are unique in this regard that their lower digestive tracts house a wide variety of amoeba, viruses, archaea, bacteria, and other single-celled organisms." This screen flashes with a representation of a human intestinal tract housing colonies of single-cell organisms. The audience began to mutter amongst themselves. Surely, this cannot be possible. Surely these are all cases of some new disease. "And no," Dr. Lbry firmly confirms, anticipating these questions. "This is not a case of some large-scale infection, and these do not appear to have any adverse effects on our human colleagues. On the contrary, these have been linked to their physical well-being. A mismanagement or complete destruction of these microbiomes could lead to a grave illness, a condition known to humans as gut microbiota dysbiosis. In other words, Terrans have found a way to symbiotically coexist with what would normally be considered a pandemic causing pathogens in 90% of the sapient species." Dr. Lbry paused, allowing the audience to digest everything that had just been said so far. "And before it comes to mind," he continues, "this condition is not limited to humans. In fact, this condition is common across all species in Sol 3, save for a few handful of outliers. What counts as a rarity in the galactic scale is common amongst Terrans. Sol 3, Earth, or Terra, is literally so much of a death world that the laws of life have been entirely reversed." The audience remained silent, staring at the screen as it projected an image of Sol 3 and videos of a variety of different multicellular animals and plant species, the implications slowly sinking in. "Now you understand why I use the term Terran for this presentation. But now, you must be wondering how on earth, pun intended, could this occur at such a large scale?" Dr. Lbry says in a comforting yet confident tone. He pauses and flashes the next slide of the presentation. On the screen flashed a diagram of a cell used in the Sol 3 curricula. Visible were various parts: the nucleus, the organelles, the membrane, and the cytoplasm. What you see on the screen is a representation of the cellular structure common in Sol 3. At first glance, it doesn't look all that different from other cellular diagrams. A core containing genetic material, smaller parts with specific functions and cell maintenance, the internal fluid and the housing that maintains its structural integrity. Dr. Lbry says, nodding. But there is one unique aspect that has evolved across all species in Sol 3 that is yet to be documented on any other world. The presentation then showed magnified versions of two oblong-shaped parts with their internal mechanisms shown. These organelles, the mitochondria and the chloroplast, are often joked about in human biology circles as simply being the powerhouse of the cell, citing that these are the limits of what would often be remembered by most students by the time they graduate. Dr. Lbry narrates. Sad to say, that tends to be the case for most of my own students. Chuckles emerged from the audience, perhaps glad to have some of the tension relieved. While all species have some counterpart that functions in much the same way, these organelles have two unique traits. The observant amongst you might have already noticed the oddities in the diagram, Dr. Lbry surmised. At this, the audience stared intently at the diagrams. Some began looking with great confusion, others stared back at the presenter, thinking, perhaps, that some mistake was made in the creation of these representations. Seeing these expressions, Dr. Lbry continued, I assure you that these are accurate as they can be. These organelles, the common mitochondria and the plant-based counterpart, the chloroplast, have two unique traits that puzzled many comparative xenobacteriobiologists since the introduction of the human race into the galactic stage. 1. These originals have a dual-layered membrane similar to the outermost cellular membrane. And 2. These originals carry their own genetic material independent of the main cell, yet consistently multiply with the cell during mitosis and meiosis. Most had simply shrugged these off as a mistake in the printing, but conformity studies have proven otherwise. Mutters began to rise from the audience as they turned to each other in an attempt to resolve the puzzle that they had been handed. On cue, Dr. Lbry continued, These occur due to an interesting evolutionary development in a common ancestor of all complex organisms of Sol 3. The presentation flashed to a simulation of a larger single-celled organism engulfing another. It is believed that these originated from an incident wherein a eukaryotic organism attempted to consume the organisms that were mitochondria, and later on, chloroplast. In the early days of Sol 3's evolutionary history, the only thing was that the consumed cell and the predatory cell somehow formed a symbiotic relationship that continues to this day. Simply put, some fecker got swallowed by a predator and decided, you know what, it's kind of comfy here. Hey, want a sandwich? And the predator let them live. Dr. Lbry paused to take a breath. Silence filled the hall at the revelation. Symbiosis was not uncommon in the galactic scale, but for symbiosis of this sort, between what was once a predator and prey, was uncanny and unwieldy at best. To have it succeed at such a scale as to form a sapient species is even more of a surprise. As we can see here, Terrans are marked by this unique symbiosis from their evolutionary history, and it is my theory that this continues in the puzzling microbiological interactions of Terran organisms, micro and macro, towards each other, he says, and this is perhaps precisely because of the conditions presented by Sol 3. Imagine a world so deadly, so terrifying, that existing in the stomach of one's predator is far more optimal survival strategy than being exposed to the planet. Imagine a world so harsh that even the simplest of organisms are forced to adapt from survival of the fittest to survival of the fittest symbiosis. At this, Dr. Lbry clears his throat, realizing that he'd begun becoming a bit too emotional in his delivery, though the audience didn't seem to mind as they too had become embroiled in their own emotions. When humans entered the galactic stage, the older races braced themselves for a warlike species who would be incapable of diplomacy and compromise, he continued, attempting to talk much more calmly. And, in a way, they did get a species extremely capable, masters even, of warfare. Yet, in spite of this, they were the first to extend a handshake to the diplomatic envoy sent by the Council. This had long been primarily attributed to the humans' own brutal wars, which involved the detonation of nuclear armaments on their own citizens. Perhaps, to some extent, that was true. But I argue that there is something more intrinsic, their evolutionary history. Whereas other Deathworlders would be sharpened by strict evolutionary roles of survival of the fittest, Sol 3 gifted her children with the laws of symbiosis, of adaptability. And it is this adaptability that we applaud humanity for and our galactic community. At this, the audience began to stir, some nodding in agreement, others scoffing at the strictly evolutionary perspective, having snapped out of the shock of the presentation's finding. Let me make one thing clear. I don't doubt that many near-extinction events faced by humanity have created a culture that, in equal measure, harbors the warmest empathy and the coldest vengeance. I don't doubt that the many planetary-wide conflicts have created a shared capacity for the greatest feats of diplomacy and the worst terrors of war. I don't doubt that their wide range of histories, individualities, and belief systems have made them a sapient equivalent of a multi-tool. I don't doubt that the harsh conditions of Sol 3, with its many characteristics that would make any religious construct of hell sound like a paradise, has played a pivotal role in the creation of a species so resistant to a wide range of extremes that they make interplanetary mech suits look like they're made of paper. I don't doubt that my colleagues across the various fields have done their due diligence given the state of the literature at the time, Dr. Lbry clarified. But to say that there is nothing in their genetic history that points towards their complexities is far too simplistic and, as humans would say, utter bullcrap, he continued. We have spent enough time making humans, and by extension, Terrans, the impossible devils that defy our doctrines of science and causality. As we have discussed here today, from a xenomicrobiologist's point of view, it all makes sense in the end. I believe there is a human saying that fits well in this case. The devil is in the details. End of story. Just a quick shout out to the T5 peeps. Bob the Dragon, Cat Crab Lobster, Data Magnet, Dark Machine, Bezic, Try Again 95, Fudic Yol, Astrea the Dreamer, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Athelia, Meridian 117, and Jordan Bucksmorm. Thank you very much. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. There are links down below, both to support this channel and for the author of this fiction. Anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.